Boa tarde a todas e todos aqui presentes.
Good afternoon, everyone. To everyone who's present, everybody who's following us on YouTube. And we wish that FIB15 will contribute towards multi-sectorial dialogues. And we'd also like this to be an unforgettable moment for networking for everyone all over Brazil. So for the opening remarks, and at the right time, we will have a Q&A session for the panel. So for those who are in person in Salvador, Bahia, may join the queue right in front of the microphone. And for those who are remote, can send your questions or comments through the chat on YouTube. You can follow the event on social media, NIC.br, and use our hashtag FIB15. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, Twitter, Telegram. For the opening remarks, Bianca, our moderator today. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our main session, number 2, the legacy of Eco92, environment, technologies, and governance. I'm Bianca Kremer. I'm the head council member representative of the third sector at CGI. So I have the honor of moderating this panel that was conceived and worked on by our press relations team, Tatiana Gerenciati and Luiz Mesquita, who I'd like to thank for their dedication and how they manage this, and also who sent the invitations to our dear speakers. We still don't have the presence of Eliette Paragrasu, who promptly received the invitation. However, she will join us during the second step of the panel, but we are still very anxious for the contributions and for this debate. Now, I'd like to present the proposal of this panel, which is to bring in the convergencies and legacies that we have from Eco92 to the current date about the environment and internet governance. The United Nations conference Eco92 was held in Rio de Janeiro, and that was a milestone for the milestones about the environment and in new economic development. And it launched assumptions for sustainable development in the world and also added to climate change, the biggest pact that was signed for actions to avoid the dangerous human intervention to the climate system. The legacy of Eco92 to protect the environment is recognized globally, but the importance goes much beyond that. For the first time, there's a way to manage that considered an opinion from many different parties and undeniably influenced that what was known to be the multi-sectorial model, moving towards prosperity and the story of environmental and internet governance. In addition, in having more social participation of non-conventional industries, counting on local computers connected to the internet. In 2025, the CGI is celebrating 30 years of existence. And in that same year, we are the chair of COP30. In that cross between internet governance and environmental governance, we would like to propose a reflection about the legacy of Eco92 for these two agendas. So we're trying to assess how, and we believe that in a critical way, we couldn't be more thankful for the presence of our speakers and how, based on that, we can have the social participation in these two debates and how we can cross them so we can build the desirable and potential futures for our communities. So now, I'm going to introduce our dear panelists, not in the order that they are seated here. So first, I have Carlos Alberto Alfonso from the PF Institute, very important for Eco92, the story of internet in Brazil, without which we wouldn't able to have this debate without understanding the historical context of his presence and how to think of potential futures based on his professional work that inspires us so much. We also have Everton Cruzeiro, diplomat from Itamaraty, who can contribute, especially in the decision-making process, as I talked to him before the panel, about the processes in decision-making and the results of the decisions related to the government with a very robust agenda and the intersection of your work with internet governance. So thank you for your participation. We have Danielle Freire from the Global Compact, the Brazil Network. Thank you for your contributions, bringing in the work of the Global Compact and your presence in these debates. We have Terezinha Brito from CEPARTS, representing civil society and also bringing in the agenda of civil society to project the new generation and how we're working within this theme. And Diosmar Filho from the Association of Research, professor, geographer, with an intense participation not only in the debates for the COP30 this year, but also with an amazing work by building dialogues, networks, and futures within the theme of environmental right, not just environmental right, but environmental relations. I'm not part of the environmental area, but I am very curious and interested in your professional work, your production, and your work. So thank you very much for your presence in this multi-sectorial debate and multidisciplinary as well, so we can think about the future of internet governance and environmental governance. Having said that, we will have two rounds. The first one will be the historical rescue of Eco92 to the current date. Each speaker will have 8 to 10 minutes to mention their points. And the second round will be about the future perspectives, because we talk about the past to project the future. So we'll think about opportunities and challenges for both agendas and the perspective. So now over to CA Carlos Alberto from New Pref. And I'd always so like to say that I may have to cut you off because we don't have that much time. Already inspired by the School of Glazers, so I'm very well trained to do that. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to do that. So I'd like to hand over to CA from the New Pref Institute to give his contributions. Thank you. I'd like to ask for an extra minute to protest about what happened with Minister Marina Silva at the Congress. She was called by a senator, Mr. Plínio Valério from Amazonas. First of all, in March, he said that Marina deserved to get beat up and then that she had to be hung. And now in a session in the Senate discussing about a roadway in the Amazon region, he said he had to separate the woman from a minister because the first one deserved respect and the second one didn't. So these aggressions continued and she had to leave the commission, which she was part as a volunteer. So I have to say that I feel for her and I protest against that type of racism in the Congress known by the secret budget.
Então vamos lá ao nosso assunto.
So let's move on to our topic today. In June 1992, that was a while back, a UN conference, which was very large scale, crossed with the parallel developments in networks of civil society of many different countries. Okay, so 92. Particularly in Brazil, it coincided with the national creation of the National Network of Research and Education and decisively contributed to activate the first connections that were permanent in Brazil with the internet. In June 2022, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of Eco92 and the 50th anniversary of the first big conference of the United Nations about the environment in Stockholm, where 26 principles were recommended to protect and interact with the environment. The Stockholm Conference of 72 gathered 36 countries, and one of the most significant impacts was creating the PNUMA, the Program of the United Nations for the Environment. And after that, Eco92 counted on a network of computers connected to the internet in United Nations events of this size. The event was also characterized by the multi-sectoral participation, meaning governments and civil society, academia, and companies. So the four classic sectors that the UN has been using to make sure they have a multi-stakeholder participation. So Eco92 was the first UN event to have that and to respond to international demands and non-governmental industries. So networks connected to the internet enabled information management in the main areas of the conference. So the proposal of connecting the spaces of Eco92 to the internet took place in a moment where Brazilian civil society, in the person of the IBASE from Rio de Janeiro, was taking its first steps in the internet in parallel to an initiative to connect the academia. So why is IBASE part of that? In the beginning of the 80s, a small group of non-governmental organizations from many different countries, including IBASE, developed their own network using the technologies available to train groups that were working for towards the or against social injustice. So the network was called Interdoc, including civil organizations from four continents, created a mandate with a common program with objectives to train and create organizations between workers, base activists, facilitate research and education, and follow international policies, collect and promote data about human rights, and disseminate information about the sustainable development. The Interdoc network planted the seed, which would be the creation of the World Network of the Association in May 1990, where IBASE and other organizations from many countries participating. So it was created with the mission of finding tools to overcome geographic and political barriers between peoples using information and technology tools. Today, it has 63 institutional members and 44 members in 34 countries, and it's part of the UN Social and Economic Development Committee. United Nations were familiar with the EPC since its creation, and in 1990, with the Global Summit for Children, UNICEF created forums of online discussions that were enabled by internet services from EPC members. So IBASE's work and PC's work in developing networks stood out to the General Secretary of Eco92 and invited IBASE to be a part of the Brazilian component of the conference. And that resulted in installing in all the spaces of the conference and telecenters of computers connected to the internet in the network to exchange files. Back then, the speed was kilobytes per second, and messages, we didn't have videos, pictures, or anything like that. At the end of 1990, IBASE presented a first proposal to establish an effective system for data in Eco92 with the technical support of RNP and other members of APC and financial support from agencies from Canada and Holland. So the conference took place in 3 places: Rio Centro, the Gloria Hotel, and the Center of Media close to the hotel. Long-distance telecommunication back then were exclusively operated by Embratel, a state-owned company. The company was against using circuits with internet protocols, as the official standard adopted was Laws in ISO and sacramented by IUD. The leader of RNP, Cabral Tarkadash, is now deceased, took on the task of convincing governmental entities and not only to approve but also support the network project in the 3 spaces of the conference, while the IBAS team, with the support of UN members and ADC, had to negotiate with the Secretariat the introduction of internet and network projects with the federal government of Brazil, and that was only possible because we were able to introduce the internet project in Eco92 in the official agreement between Brazil and the UN. So in that way, we were able to conclude the agreement of host country, the requirement of direct connections between the areas of the conference and the internet. And that was possible with the decisive role of the RNP in making these connections feasible, and the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and FIB15 here in São Paulo, in addition to dedicated connections between the 3 spaces by Telerge, which was a telephone company from Rio, providing many telephone lines and dedicated circuits for the project. So the success of this project in Rio for Eco92 led APC to have similar projects for forums and NGOs in 93 of the UN for human rights in Vienna, 94 the International Conference on the Population and Development in Cairo, and 95 World Conference about Women and Development in Peking, with the participation of the IBASE team. An important part of that work in the years was to facilitate exchanging information, and through APC electronic forums hosted by Vernex and other servers. The internet project for Eco92 was a fundamental milestone of Brazilian internet, which was a paradigm shift in opening permanent internet connections for the RNP in the country. And that's how the first 2 permanent channels were activated with very high speed, 64 kilobits per second, with the US from São Paulo and from Rio de Janeiro. On the IBASE side, a lot of effort was endeavored to disseminate the idea of network, and a project to incubate providers was determined in 1992 with the connection of 56 BBS services in Brazil, electronic boards, notification boards with the internet. So that learning with the internet, that's where most of the internet providers were born in the country, such as Mandic, UOL, and so on and so forth. An incentive project for startups in a time where expression and concept didn't really exist. And according to the APC philosophy of being part of processes and not just events, in each one of these projects resulted in international theme networks and a great collection of official information distributed by them. I've run out of time, and I'll continue with this in the second part.
Muito obrigada, CA.
Thank you very much,
Muito
CA.
obrigada.
Thank you very much. It's worth noting that the idea of this panel was a result of a work group that we have with CGI, Diversity and Sustainability, for a paper that you wrote with Ona Castro about the legacy of Eco92 and the importance of having that memory so we can think of the present to project the future. Now, I'd like to hand over to our diplomat, Everson Lucero from Itamaraty. He's a Brazilian diplomat, authored books about governance of the internet, represented Brazil, and in 2012 in the DICA. So we're waiting for your contributions. Thank you. Thank you, Bianca. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to greet all my colleagues here in the panel and everyone in the audience. And a special thank you to Carlos Afonso, CA. It's very hard to speak after him, not just because of all the knowledge that he has on this, but he actually experienced that. He was part of that and had all these contacts that were made at the diplomatic level and technical level with the United Nations before Rio 92. I would really like to thank the management committee for this invitation to be a part of this session. It's an honor to be able to contribute with the reflection of the role of Rio 92 in the path of internet governance in Brazil.
I do believe that our role here today is to talk about this historical intersection between the Rio de Janeiro conference and the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance. This model over here and abroad is a reflex of the complex presentation of internet, and its management should not be restricted only to states. Multi-sectorial and stakeholder benefits from traditional multilateralism due to a sovereignty over a territory, neither a power of state agents, but common goals and convergence of expectations among different players. Whereas multilateralism is a centric state, multi-sectorialism embraces the participation of non-statal agents, which is key to an internet which operates on a decentralized manner and small barriers. How about Rio 1992? What is the involvement? Well, that was a Brazilian conference which allowed to set the first connections, interactions, open space to the introduction of TCLP protocols, even when the country's original norms would comply with IoT norms. The decision to apply open protocols was an example of participative coordination which has engaged a number of sectors, which later on would be known as multi-sectorial model for internet governance in Brazil. A little while later, in 1995, we have CGI.br, the first agency to adopt under institutional manner the multi-sectorial model, even with a fragile institutional base. CGI.br was made with representatives from the government, academy, civil society, and the business sector. Its very beginning had allowed a balanced participation of all different sectors. That has always been their strength, which gives allowance not only to internet in Brazil, but also worldwide discussions about governance. As I mentioned in my book, CGI.br is a great example of multi-stakeholder, stable, with effective participation of several members from different sectors, where they all base their decisions made on transparency and a full consensus. That dates back from Rio 1992 and became one of the pillars of internet governance as time went by. CGI consolidate itself as a governance, internet governance pioneer, and Brazil is helping consistently to spread this multi-sectorial model of governance. Since 1992, before the Worldwide Information Summit, which was organized by the UN, where the multi-stakeholder concept was acknowledged as a central element of internet governance, especially in the Tunis agenda from 2005.
Fala em que o desenvolvimento e aplicação, que o multissetorialismo
The development and the multi-stakeholder is the development and application to government, civil society, and private sector, developing their roles according to principle, norms, rules, decision process, and programs which will tailor the evolution and the use of the internet, which shows the influence of international regimens such as Stephen Kastner, which has included as essential elements principle, norms, rules, and decision-making processes. Brazil has been very active in advocating for this model since the very beginning, counting on a concrete and functional CGI's experience. That was when I started working at Itamaraty. In 1992, I was still a student. I went to Rio de Janeiro just giving support to the delegations that came down here at that time. And that the Rio 92 was the largest conference that Brazil has ever hosted. Then we had the NET Mundial 2014, reinforcing baseline principles, the civil mark of the internet, which has emphasized all the participation that Brazil has in that sense. Internet governance throughout this trajectory is being dated by a coordinated way to emphasize our diplomatic approach, where we have a capacity to talk about complex topics such as to defeat childhood abuse and childhood pornography. And Tiago Tavares, who is a former counselor of NIC.br and a great motivator of SaferNet Brazil, with the decentralized and distributed activities where several players get together to discuss about one specific point. All these initiatives after the civil rights framework for internet and global multi-stakeholder internet governance. In a nutshell, it is proper to say that Rio 92, or UNCTAD as we usually name it, and a UN traditional multilateral conference was also very innovative, with an institutional and cultural trace to be open to the full participation as the multi-stakeholder internet governance model. That was an engagement between all the sectors, and it became a political framework for the multi-stakeholder for internet governance in Brazil and all over. I would like to close my first presentation congratulating the CGI for your 30 years of endeavors and activities. I am so proud to be able to collaborate to this collective structure and a trajectory which was not simple, with the conflicts, pressures, backlashes, but we follow very positive, effective, and strong. Internet is not just a network of cables and protocols, but a political arena, a citizenship citizenship space and a territory for rights. That's why multi-stakeholder is key, because it makes us reminded that no sectors, neither government, academies, or any others, may decide by themselves the future of a common good such as internet. And since we have learned from 1992, a future can just build up if it's done collectively. And such a message or learning, it may also apply to COP30, which will be hosted in Belém. First time that we are going to have a conference like that, a climate convention summit in the Amazon region. And we are pretty sure that if we follow that model closer to a participation, we will be very successful in our conference. My time is almost up, and I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you so much. We are the ones to thank you for your comments. Well, next, we would like to give the floor to Daniele Freire. Let us remember that she has got a degree in environmental engineering and also a master's degree in environment, health, and sustainability by the Public Medical Health University. And she's got over 10 years of experience in sustainability, strategic plans, and she works as a climate head for Rede Brasil Global Agreement. You have the floor. Thank you, Bianca. I also would like to thank CGI for the invitation, and it's a great honor to share this panel with distinguished members. I will make my auto description for those that have low visual acuity. I am a white woman, brown and eyes, hair and brown and eyes brown. I am with the lipsticks and I'm wearing a black sweater.
Obviamente não vou entrar em tantos detalhes porque brilhantemente tanto o CA quanto o Everson já trouxeram
I will not go into details because my peers have addressed really well some history aspects that took place during Eco92, and why is that framework so important for the coming conferences, not just on climate, but other two conferences that were made since Eco92, and they are part of this historical time, which is the conference to defeat biodiversity. They take place every 2 years, and just the climate conference, which happens annually. This is a very important disclaimer, so you may understand how important it was to environment sector, the Eco92. I am an engineer working together with the diplomats. That is not my role because I am not a lawyer, neither internationalist, but I believe that all areas should be involved and participating at a conference like that. Before Eco92, and since before the 90s, there is scientific studies which show that, well, I believe that anthropogenic emissions, they are affecting the Earth temperature. And we are still fighting against those that are deniers. I believe that we have no deniers in the premises, but it's relevant to continue with this idea and importance to keep on going. Of a scientific consensus of the climate crisis that we are living.
Ponto de esperança, né? Eu, como boa engenheira, eu sempre gosto de me apegar ali com o protocolo de Montreal.
I always like to address the Montreal Protocol, which was successful even before Eco92, which was in 87, where we managed to deal with the reduction of the use of soda gases. And then the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, it was based on a construction with the main participation of Brazilian entrepreneurs, and together with Kyoto Protocol that has been expanded and part of the debate, so we'll be able to reach some level of consensus to allow climate funds.
Então, acho importante a gente tratar pouco desse histórico sobre toda essa relevância de
And we have to understand all this relevance of climate changes and crisis and how can we help. So we have adolescents and the global agreement, and our target audience is the private sector. It's worthwhile knowing that despite we might have over 190 countries which are members of the climate conference, part of the emissions, they come from 80% by the private sector. Private sector is responsible to 80% of those emissions, and they do not have a direct participation in the panel discussion. We'll have the Glasgow and Marrakesh agreements where we have to include the private sector as they are the main green gases effects issuers, so they have to be involved into the discussion. So COP is the Conference of the Parts. That's the convention of the UN about climate changes, and you are all invited to participate and understand what this Conference of the Parts mean, and the multilateral forum which was created by the UN in 1994 since Eco92, and the UN is conveying online all the panels, the side events, and some debriefings of the negotiation. And now within 3 weeks, we are going to have the pre-COP. It happens in Bonn. It will take place in German, and you may enroll yourselves just to follow remotely all the side events that will be taking place in their German office. And that's key. If we didn't have a tool like that, we wouldn't be able to be spreading so significant informations like that. So how can companies participate? You have to enroll yourself. Stay tuned. Around June, the Itamaraty will open it, and they have to try their credentials regardless. Blue Zone, which is a diplomatic area for negotiation, where there are several others which may use the participation to the private sector and civil society, which is the Green Zone, which does not allow that, and that will be open and it will be incentivized by the government, so people may also participate. And here to the private sector, why is it important that companies are participating within a conference? Because associations of the industry, all other associations, they have to be there, because this is a place where you have your corporative responsibility. You also become responsible as an important player that has to perform their inventory, annually monitoring green gases effects. How may I elaborate all these numbers so by 2050 I may reach zero net or net zero? How can I reduce the emissions and reach this net zero until 2050 or 40? In addition, we have some business opportunities. The Green Zone is a multi-stakeholder area where we don't just see civil society or other companies participating, but several development banks such as BID, BNDES, all of them allowing this type of negotiations, any number of agreements, maybe philanthropic charity funds, private or mixed funds. You all have to be present to participate. Of course, that influence may be useful for biofuel. How can we exchange our fleet to run on biomethane or electric cars, biodiesel or green diesel if we don't have public policies and the private sector understanding what incentive measures or finance lines are necessary to exchange my fleet. That's why we need a good advocacy, but not as a single company, but collectively, where everyone will go after the same goal, which is the decarbonization, and to get such a public influence from the government to reach net zero.
And then we can have many partnerships and collaborations in between sectors. I was talking to Diosmar, so my dream is to have a project with Ioleto, so I would learn a lot from him. So it's about a partnership, a player that looks at the private sector but knows the importance of academia and research and development, so that all these matters can take place and be implemented in the private sector. That's what I'd like to say for the first round. Thank you, Bianca. Now over to my colleagues. Thank you very much. So now over to Diosmar Filho from the Association of Research. He's a geographer from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I also studied that, a master's in geography, and has been the focal point according to the United Nations climate change work. So he's written books, papers, a lot of work in civil society. We'd love to hear your contributions in our panel. Good afternoon, Bianca. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm very happy to see the professor here and listen to his story and bring in these memories. And I'd like to thank the CGI for this invitation as well, for Tatiana and Luisa who were here. I'm not going to say more about the Aleta Research Association, but I would like to take this opportunity, as we have the diplomat here and the others, and about Eco92 that we have to strengthen at this time, and talk about multi-stakeholders, and also talk about the Charter of the Earth. Few is said about that. I was in Rio Branco. I was in 5th grade in 1992. So I was in Teixeira, bathing myself in the river and going into mangroves. So where were we, right? In Eco 92. So what have we built since Eco 92? So looking at the signature of the convention, and even though it was multilateral, it happened in the signature of the Earth Charter. So when you look at that convention, it's very multi-stakeholder. It's pressured by work between civil society as an observer who is discussing the points that is being discussed given the multilateral aspect to that. So that scientific and technical qualification and the incidence of civil society enables the Charter of the United Nations to have a different dimension, and that integration with civil society and academia, even though it is based on the parties, so the national states that are there. And that has to do with that moment. It was signed in 92 as the Earth Charter. So there's something very deep in that, which is a call to humanity to care for the earth. I was a geographer.
Estava aqui falando, né, sobre, eu sou intrusa nesse campo, eu sou geógrafo, então eu não conheço de rede de internet.
I was thinking that I'm an imposter because I don't know about internet networks, but I do know about space. And then I think about Professor Milton Santos, who talked about the spatial economy when he published that in 46. And in 79, he published that to discuss the structures, the forms and functions of how technique and technology will make spatial changes. And that was in 79. In 79, he published the book, and I was born. So you can see Howe's memories, because when this panel proposed to be a memory of 92, the memory has to do about how we built spaces and the type of structure that we had back in 79, where we recently had the environmental conference of 72 in Stockholm, building an agenda. And we were looking at the condition to take care of the planet, and that's imperative. So if we are working with industrialism that is consuming a great part of the planet, but it was doing that through deep inequality. We were going from slavery in the 19th century and then going into technology in the industrial system with more inequality at a global scale. And Professor Nilton Santos is going to talk about, or talked about, how we'll work with networks and how we'll think about that. So when he brings us that, and calling him CA, when we bring in this scenario, when we talk about the internet, we're talking about something that's spatial. And it doesn't have borders, but the borders are created in it so that not everyone had access to that internet. Not everybody followed that path. And even in academia, I remember back in the 90s, in the IBASE process, when Professor Paulo Preto was doing work to install centers and cyber locations in the outskirts of Salvador through the UFA that was doing that in community centers to work with the 200 bytes of speed, right? We could do a lot with that back then. So the democratization and the Earth Charter and about how Eco92 is important. And in geography, I have to say that we were able to democratize, and in this period, we were able to build another thing. Another thing, what Mr. Milton Santos said in his document, I'm afraid of the popular time of history that's going to take place. And he said that at the end of the 90s and before, and then it was like, think 2021. And he used to say that I'm afraid of time in history. So what he meant was, what's going to happen with the spatial change about how we would occupy space after the internet? How relationships would change in territories. Territorialism, and which framework would respond to that role, which is access to democratization, and the world living based on that structure that's called networks with the internet. So that's something important. And in the second round, I'm going to talk more about how we're working on the conversion and creating an agenda based on that. Thank you. Thank you.
E para finalizar a nossa
And to
primeira etapa
conclude
do
our first step
painel, vou
of the
chamar
panel,
Terezinha Alves Brito,
I'm going to
do
ask
CEPAT,
Terezinha Alves
pesquisadora
Brito
do
from
uso da
CEPAT,
internet para o desenvolvimento socioeconômico alinhado
researcher
aos
for the
direitos humanos.
Internet for Social
É
Economic
membro do
Development
CEPAT,
in line with
foi
human
líder na
rights. She's a member
no
of
ano
CPAT,
passado, 2024. Atualmente ela é membro da ISOC Brasil e produtora
currently
do
member of
podcast
ISA in Brazil
Amazônias
and producer
Conectadas.
of the
Fala, Terezinha.
podcast Amazônias
Olá,
Conectadas.
pessoal, minha voz já foi, mas eu
Sorry,
espero que
everyone.
eu
I
consiga
don't really have
cumprir
a
meu papel no
voice
que é tão
here, but
importante,
I
né, de
hope
grande
I can
responsabilidade,
fulfill my
não só
role as it's
representar a
very
sociedade civil,
important
mas também
and a lot of
representar a juventude.
responsibility. I'm representing
Gostaria
youth
de
and
agradecer ao
civil
CGI,
society.
né,
I'd
por
like to thank the
promover o
CGI
debate sobre esse tema
for
tão
promoting a debate
sensível
on this
aqui na sessão
topic, on such a
principal,
sensitive topic in the
a
main
equipe do NIC,
session,
né, pelo convite,
and
e ao
the
CEPARTS, né,
NIC.br
por me permitir
team
estar aqui
and
representando a minha
CPACs that
organização.
allowed me to present my
Esse tema é um
organization.
tema que é muito caro para mim por diversas
This
razões,
topic
mas a
is very
principal
dear
delas é
to me
porque
for
eu
many
cresci
different reasons, but the main reason is
no interior
because
do Pará
I grew up in
e
the
pude ver
interior
de
of the state of
perto o que
Pará,
significa
and
o avanço
I was able to see up
tecnológico
close
desacompanhado de uma
the
preocupação
technology
com a dignidade de
advancement
vida das pessoas.
with
Então,
no
acredito
concern
que
in
é
people's
muito importante a gente
towards people's
pensar, de
dignity.
fato, o legado da
So we do have
Eco92
to think about
para
the Eco92 legacy
a percepção, né, de que o multissetorialismo ele não é
for the
só positivo,
perception
mas ele é
that
necessário, mas a gente precisa também
multi-stakeholderism is
se
very
perguntar
necessary, and we
porque,
also
apesar da
have to
gente ter
ask
reconhecido
ourselves,
isso
because even though we have
e da gente ter
recognized that,
espaço, né, no ecossistema de GI,
we
principalmente no
need
Brasil, né, no ecossistema de governança da
space
internet
in the
multissetorial,
ecosystem.
a gente ainda não ter conseguido tratar o tema
But we still
ambiental
haven't
com a seriedade
been
que
able to
merece,
handle the
já que
environmental
esse
theme
espaço
with
foi um espaço
the
conquistado com muita dificuldade
respect
e é um
that it
espaço positivo para a
deserves.
discussão desse tema.
So it was very hard
E a gente sabe que
to reach this
intencionalmente
space,
o
and
debate
we
de
know
tecnologia
that the
exclui
debate
os custos
of
ambientais do avanço
technology
tecnológico. E a gente precisa se perguntar
includes
por
the
quê.
environment
E eu digo isso porque
in
quando eu
technology
comecei
advancement, and we have to
a
ask ourselves
pesquisar
why. And I'm
esse
saying
tema
that because when
da
I started to
da
research
conectividade,
the
do meio
topic
ambiente,
of
uma pergunta que sempre me faziam
connectivity
era,
and the
mas por que a
environment, a
internet
question
tem
they
a
already
ver
always
com o
ask
meio
me is,
ambiente e
how
com
is
mudança
the internet
climática?
connected
E
to
o fato
environment
da
and
gente
climate
ter essa
change?
pergunta sendo tão
But the
recorrente
fact
é um
is that we
sintoma
have this
do
recurring
quão
question.
desconexos a gente está
That's
da
a
nossa própria
system
realidade enquanto
about
sociedade.
how disconnected we are in our reality
Algumas
and
coisas que eu
in
trouxe aqui
society.
e que eu acho que a
There's some
gente
things that I
não pode
brought
deixar de
in
fora é entender que
today to talk about, and I
a
must,
participação
which
de muitos
is
atores, né,
the
ela não é só algo
participation of many different
positivo, ela é
players.
necessário.
It's not
Eu acho que
just
é algo que
something
eu sempre
that's
falo, mas
positive,
não
it's
falo isso de uma
necessary.
forma,
I
não
always
falo
like
isso,
to say
não
this,
falo isso de uma forma
but
na qual eu me sinta feliz por falar, mas a
I
gente entender
don't
que a
want
participação
to say that I'm
de
happy to say
múltiplos
this,
atores
but I
e
believe that
de
the
ter diversidade,
participation of
pluralidade,
multiple
ainda que
players having diversity
múltiplos atores, ela
and
não é
plurality,
filantropia, ela é necessária.
but
Não
still,
tem como
it's
a
not
gente entender
philanthropy,
e
it's
compreender
necessary. You
o
can't
quão complexo,
understand
né, e aí tem
a
esse paralelo
topic
entre internet e
that
o
is so
ambiente,
complex as
que
this
tanto
one
são temas
between
globais,
the
como são temas
internet and
que não
environment,
adianta a
because
gente
they're global
discutir. E
topics.
eu acompanhei a sessão mais cedo sobre opacidade ambiental, né? Não dá para a gente
I
discutir o
watched
que
the
aconteceu
other
no Rio Grande do
session
Sul
about
sem falar
environmental
sobre o
opacity.
que
We
tem
can't forget what
acontecido
happened in Rio Grande do
na
Sul,
Amazônia, e não só
and
na
not to
Amazônia
mention what has
brasileira, mas
happened in
nas Amazônias que
the
a gente tem na
Brazilian
América do Sul.
Amazon, and not just that, in
Então, é
all
de se
the
pensar
Amazons that we have
que
in South
é
America. So it's
ativo,
something
de
that we have
fato.
to think
A
about.
diversidade ela é
It's an
necessária, porque
actual
sem ela,
asset.
já que
Diversity is
nos
necessary
propomos a
because without
compreender e a criar
it,
soluções
as we decided to propose and
verdadeiras,
create true
sem a pluralidade,
solutions,
sem a participação das pessoas afetadas, ela não pode
without the
ser
participation
construída, e
of
se ela for construída,
these
ela não vai
people
ser
that were
efetiva, né?
affected in
Aí acho que a gente volta um pouco
plurality,
sobre
it
a
won't be built and
distribuição.
it
Acho
won't
que um
be
exemplo muito
effective.
claro disso, que
A
eu já
clear
mencionei outras
example of
vezes,
that, and I've
da
mentioned
distribuição
that
de
before,
chips
is the
com dados móveis,
distribution
acho que de uma forma
of
específica na
SIM
região de
cards
Santarém
with
durante a pandemia.
mobile data in
E a
Santarém
gente perguntou
during the
à população
pandemic,
daquele local
but nobody
se
asked the
aquela operadora
population at that
específica
location
funcionava
if
de
that
fato,
specific
e os
carrier
alunos
worked in that
tinham
region.
chips, mas não tinham
So
dispositivos, e
people
mesmo se elas
had
escolhessem usar aquele
the
chip,
SIM cards,
algum
but they
dispositivo
didn't have a
bateria,
device for that. And even if
a
they did
internet
have
não
a
funcionava.
device, that
Então,
internet didn't work.
eu acho que isso deixa bem claro, né?
So
Se
that
a
makes
gente
it
não
very
incluir as pessoas
clear. If
afetadas,
we don't
a gente não vai ter
include
uma solução
people that are
verdadeira.
affected, we won't have a true solution. Another important point to think about, the intersections between the internet, the environment, and climate change. It hasn't been the technological advancement and internet haven't been followed by general improvement in lifestyle of people. Actually, it's quite on the contrary. We've seen an exponential increase of economic inequality. Gen AI being used as another aspect to create more vulnerability in people's work. So if we're not intentional in the policies to think about the effects and the impacts that technologies have in our societies, and you mentioned Milton Santos, that makes me very happy because we can't disconnect the social and economic impact from the environmental impact. And then the climate change, who suffers first with the absence of readiness and lack of debate and environmental issues and technology are the people at the margin of everything, and in Brazil, they're the majority. So that means almost everybody in the country. So for the three challenges, when we talk about multi-stakeholders and the internet, as a general rule, we do not include, it's treated as an external effect, as something secondary. The debate of what actually happens and how much it costs us environmentally and social and economically, and what are the potential effects on the environment. We leave that out in debates about technology. That's still seen as an external debate, even though there's a direct impact on one thing and the other. And there's an energy cost of the data centers now, but it's still a topic that is not considering the main effects. And as a community of internet governance, and as a multi-stakeholder space, we don't have a commitment to the agenda of the digital technologies or transparency in terms of internet infrastructure and how that costs the environment, and what makes us more consumers, even obsessed with technology, than in fact users of the network. So we have to think of those three fronts, how we can handle this topic with the globality that it deserves, including the environmental costs as part of the debate, always. I don't want to go too much into what I was doing back in 92, but it's something we should think about, that we're talking about a space. It's not just an event, what happened in 92, and we're in 2025, and we still haven't been able to include the environment as an intrinsic agenda to what we're discussing. So those are the fronts. We have to include, it's not just something that we have to talk about. It's going to exist. We have to have a commitment, an evident commitment with the environmental cost. We need to talk about that. People need to know about it. We have to have metrics because we don't have them. And we need to call on that so that regulations show that and companies have that, so we can see data about that, because they exist, but they're not public. Thank you. Let's move on to the second round of the panel. And that's a part that's very interesting because it's more about perspective, about future perspectives, opportunities and challenges for the agenda. And as a moderator, I have to express my concern in that projection of opportunities, because there's a lot of doubt, and I can manifest mine. So what are opportunities and what are traps, and how we can differentiate the two scenarios? We're in a period in the Brazilian context, in Brazil's history, that we're in the middle of building a data center policy, for instance, as was presented by Terezinha, and we'll have reduction in taxes to incorporate some technologies, but building Brazil as a hub in receiving and selling that extractivist logic, as we've seen that in the Brazilian context, about how Brazil is a space for clean energy and a special space to receive that, but we're not thinking of the extractivist perspective, right? We're in a period of history where we're developing new basis for the new economy, critical minerals. And what about the Brazilian context in that scenario? What have we been able to make feasible of a country in the global south and our history, and now in the context, global context, and then COP30 to discuss the future of internet and technology development and economic development of Brazil? How do we look at that? You don't have to address using those terms. These are just my impressions based on your talks. So everybody's going to have 5 minutes now. And we have to reset the timer, please. Moving on to Carlos Afonso, CA, as we dearly call him. Thank you.
Hello. I would like to tell you about the importance of the inclusion and involvement of civil entities and the whole process, which led to a number of coincidences that led to this opportunity where entities can get together, participate, and get organized to discuss about those topics. In 1995, we created our first Center of Information and Reference about networks as to non-academic entities, to journalists, a number of journalists that today they quantify about internet. They've learned all the bases of that. The RNP, they created that, and many other journalists and other sectors, they've learned their basic concepts over the internet. Civil entities and RNP had a relevant role in the creation of the CGI, Internet Governance Committee. In April, I don't know if you know Betinho. He's a guy, this is a guy's name. He's from Rio de Janeiro, and he was the one that has designed this idea, and he has managed Embase. And he would say, I don't understand a thing, but I support you. And thanks to Betinho, many things happened. And he sent a letter to the communication minister of the time, emphasizing the importance to create a mechanism of coordination of what would be internet in Brazil. And then Sergio Mota went to Rio to have a dinner with them, where civil society, RNP, and the government representatives, they were there. That was already a multi-stakeholder type of meeting. That later on was named the Governance Committee. There were 3 Japaneses, Tadao, Betinhos, and Sergio Mota's wives. And all of them, you know, trying to tell Sergio Mota about the importance to create such a committee. And a few months later, the CGI was created, May 1995. That was before the privatization of telcos or the creation of Anatel. So I would like to emphasize internationally something else on that process, which is key. In 1996, we already had our CGI, a group of non-governmental agencies and groups from different centers. They created a platform for the rights to communications. That was the England platform, where we had to search for consensus for the rights to communication and its social and cultural impacts. With the proximity of the realization of the first summit of information society, which is known as WISIS or CMI, the London platform has made all its efforts on the acronym Communication Rights and Information Societies, CRIS, which led to a number of NGOs. And in Brazil, the leader of the process was someone who today is the president of the committee, Graciela, that's her name. And we could not transform that into simply consumers of users and service without any democratic instances which would guarantee the exercise of their rights. They would list irrevocable aspects or 6 principles that were part of those 10 principles that were later on approved as being the Decalogue. So that was generated throughout many years, where we have reached the civil framework, internet civil framework. That was 11 years after where they had proposed those 6 simples, and CGI.br started a discussion about their own principles, and that ended in 2009.
E os 10 princípios, então, foram a base.
And the 10 principles were the base of the civil framework of the internet. Civil society organized in several countries, interacting, etc., etc., that went beyond the technical components, that went beyond it, beyond the social organizations. Thank you.
Obrigada, Cia.
Thank you, Cia.
Passamos então a palavra agora a
Now I'd like to hand over to Daniele Freire for your observations. Thank you.
Obrigada, Diosmir. Eu vou trazer algumas ferramentas que a gente...
I have a number of tools here to be introduced, and we can just offer them because we have internet. And what were the possibilities? Intranet, internet.
Vou seguir aqui. Eu vou trazer 3 exemplos que a gente tem.
I have 3 examples that we have within the global agreement.
Esse primeiro,
the first one,
just
for you to understand how the global agreement is divided within 6 areas of impact, which are divided within action platforms. I'm in charge of the climate action platform, and we call them platform. And as a good millennial, if I hear platform, understand this is an internet-based, this is a software, but it was not. We released that in December, and where now we do have a platform with a really well done tailored project with future climate, a global agreement, where together we build up a capacity building journey with people who are part of the companies participating of the global agreement since the very beginning of the basic principles of climate changes, going through climate fairness, climate adaptation, mathematical modeling to reach net zero. All of that within a platform that is feasible because we have internet available. Academy, it's the UN University. You are all invited to visit us, un.academy.org. You may sinalize that in Portuguese, and regardless of being from the pact or not, there are several free courses where you may do it. And here I'm not talking just about climate. We have anti-corruption, ethics, data management. So this is one of the tools of a global platform where we may disclose and disseminate scientific information, well-based information, and with reference. And another example is an invitation, those who are from companies, prepare your cell phone for BJR gap analysis, which is a due diligence of human rights. I asked Gabriela if she could help me with that tool. And I'm very proud of this tool together with another owners agency, which is the human rights, which is the gap analysis. And it takes a while, around 2 hours, and you have to carefully answer and to be able to understand what are the bottlenecks in your company, in your operations, in human rights. And then you'll be able to extract a human report with an action plan. And you can do that every single year. And I like to mention again that this is just possible thanks to our good data dissemination, thanks to the web. In addition to data center, Bianca, there is something else which we have to understand. I believe that you have seen that several big techs, they are removing their net zero target exactly because of data centers, because of the indiscriminated use of artificial intelligence. And I include myself because I use every single day. So without knowing exactly at what level you are spending energy to the use of AI, it's no longer possible that big techs will reach net zero as in the past due to data centers that they use a huge energy where they may have all computers running. This is a very sensitive topic, but I do believe as an engineer that Brazil is a potential place with an energy matrix that may take it, but we also have to see that in terms of the transversality and environment and socio-economic matters. That's my own opinion, not the global agreement. But as an engineer, this is what I mean. And this is also a spoiler from the science base. The new standard for a mathematical modeling, is it possible to use nuclear energy? Take it easy. I personally, and that's my opinion as an engineer, I think that represents a gain. But we have to treat as we would never treat before the transversalities of governance, ethics, and human rights.
Questão, eu fico pensando, né? Vamos passar para o Josmar, é o próximo, olha só, veja você.
Who's next? I keep asking myself, how about nuclear garbage? Where is it taken to? That's why I asked about gains and challenges here.
Oi, voltando à apresentação. Já está ali. Bom, nesse momento eu vou ser um pouco mais rápido, porque agora a gente tem 5 minutos.
I'll try to be a bit brief because we have just 5 minutes left.
Pouco do que está sendo apresentado, né, do que a gente vai ter como desafio, né?
What do we have as a challenge in terms of climate governance and multi-stakeholder? That is in our global agenda, which is how can we leave this condition and to everything we are considering from now on. The world is digital and it requires structures like that. There is no expansion without new minerals. We need fossil energy, nuclear energy, wind energy, water energy, you name it.
Na Associação de Pesquisa e Alerta, que é pensar, inclusive, dentro dessa perspectiva, né,
But
como é que a gente,
within the same perspective, how have we become one of the organizations, member of the UN Convention about Climate Change, the first one in the northern region? Until 2023, we had 173 permanent observational ones but not in the northeastern region. None until 2023. This is an agenda which has advanced tremendously with the internet, which has helped the convention to advance. This is a scientific endeavor.
Né, que aqui tem uma das nossas, né, que a Mariana Gomes, que faz parte, coordena a nossa parte.
Mariana Gomes, who coordinates our communication bit in the agenda.
A gente se organiza em 3 linhas, né?
We get organized within 3 research lines. The first one is gender equity, territorial order, and segregation and housing, and the coordinations. The researcher Emanuele Góes, who is in the front line of the first one, and Andrea Ferreira, who is a researcher. Now let's switch to the main topic of today's panel. Get your cell phones ready, because the QR code will come. I'm very active, you know.
Celular é pedrada, né? Então a gente está falando de smartphone, né? Prepara aí e para baixar, porque a fala que eu vou fazer agora é justamente de como a gente entra
I will now wear the hat of COP30 and how to understand its reality, and when they are celebrating 10 years. COP30 will be hosted in Brazil at the same year where we are celebrating 10 years. In the past 10 years, we have mainly worked with this agenda more in order to mitigate negative aspects. Our commitment with the Kyoto Agreement, and then we have an agenda where they reduce equity. What happened with the ozone hole until 2007? The COP Copenhagen that had a commitment of 100 billion annually to reduce the impact and the effect of climate changes. And all of them understood that was a greenhouse effect. And suddenly we no longer talk about greenhouse effects, but we talk about a number of commitments that changed the access to platforms. Internet uses energy and electricity, and access to energy and electricity are two important topics in this internet agenda, which is based on the advancement of renewable energies. And after those 10 years of the Paris Agreement, what was left behind? Climate adaptation. And now we are very close to COP30, and according to Article 7, with the 14 paragraphs, the first one is to increase my ability to get adapted and to increase the resilience and to reduce vulnerabilities. Paragraph 4 allows elevated or high levels of mitigation. This was a strength to mitigate, and what we have mostly dedicating our time in the past 10 years. And now we are in a trade-off era for the mitigation. We are trading off. I want, but unfortunately we're not able to deliver everything that the mitigation would require to allow us to reach adaptation goals. Why? Because we are still following letter E of paragraph 7, which is a challenge of resilient economic systems. How can we take resilient economic systems if there are 4 billion people in the world suffering from climate changes? And in the Brazilian reality, we are working with 120 million people with climate vulnerability. They are living extremities of climate vulnerability. And according to the Paris Agreement, during COP30, among several things that may happen, the negotiation is to approve the new global goals for adaptation, respecting metrics, indicators that are able to help us to allow that 4 billion people will no longer be in a climate vulnerability.
If Brazil doesn't respond to that, COP30 in Brazil doesn't respond to that, oh, it was not good. But now that the Blacks are here, now that I'm here, no, it has to work. Come on. Before I joined in COP26, so it was a failure, but no. Now, give me 26 COPs, and then we can say if it was a failure. So dimensions that we have to dialogue, because to approve the objectives of adaptation is also bringing the internet. And the future is, how are we going to bring internet governance to climate governance? And then with the business sector, civil society, and research, and all the work with the Global Compact and Brazilian diplomacy projects in civil society. But if we don't recognize the inequalities that have been here deeply in transforming the Amazon in a global natural capital that annulled and became and turned the urban life in Amazon invisible. So being urban in the Amazon is invisible at a local and national scale. And that's a big danger. And even the internet that worked very well in the past 20 years for that to happen, right? So that's our future commitment, to try the adaptation, to look at the global demography, and the internet will be very important, but with internet governance and climate governance. Thank you. Thank you for the panel. Thank you. Yeah, the order of the day are many provocations, right? Now over to Terezinha Brito for her comments.
Os palestrantes têm 5 minutos.
I'd like to remind you that our speakers have 5 minutes,
abertura do microfone para perguntas ao final,
and we
tá?
will
Então,
also
você
have
poder
Q&A session at
incorporar
the
a
end.
exposição, mas nós teremos também a interação
We
com
don't
a
have
pergunta
much
que
time here
mim
for
é
them
mais
to
interessante. Sou
make their
suspeita,
comments, but we
mas
do
minha
have
opinião
an interaction with the audience. But
proposta.
I know I'm biased, but I
Palavra é
think
sua,
that's the
Terezinha.
best part, interacting with the audience. Over to
É,
you,
vamos
Terezinha.
lá.
Thank you.
Eu acho que dos principais
One of the main
fatores que a gente precisa levar em conta
factors
quando a gente
that
está
we
falando
have to
perspectivas
consider
futuras, né,
when we're talking about future
eu acho que não só
perspectives
compreender, mas
is not just to
reconhecer,
understand,
talvez, acho que um
but
pouco da
recognize
síndrome do vira-lata mesmo, a gente
and
tem que olhar, se
a
enxergar enquanto
bit
país
of
e entender o poder que nós
not
temos
seeing
no
us as a
desenvolvimento do consumidor
country
global, de
and
economia
how a
digital,
global
e
consumer
enquanto
market,
um lugar
digital
onde a gente tem recurso
technology,
hídrico e energético
and
para
places
suprir,
where we
né,
have
essas necessidades
water and
do que seria
energy,
essa nova era das transformações digitais e é
and to
apesar
go into the
disso, é
new era of
frustrante a gente
digital
perceber que sequer
transformation. And
enquanto país a
although we
gente
have
tem essa
that, it's
capacidade, né?
frustrating
Aqui eu faço menção
to see that lack of
ao
capacity.
trabalho que o IDEC tem feito junto com o LAPIM, junto com o IPREC, né? Por mais
So, and the
transparência, e eu
work
acho
that's
que
being
essa
done
é a
for more
palavra-chave,
transparency, I think that's
principalmente
the
enquanto
key
pesquisador, enquanto
word,
sociedade civil, porque
especially as a
ainda que a
report,
gente não
a
veja, digamos assim,
researcher
atores
for civil
tomadores de
society,
decisão
even though we
fazendo
don't
algo a
see
respeito, se a gente
players
tem
and decision
transparência, a
makers
gente tem
doing
dados,
something
né?
about
Eu
that, if
posso
we
ir
have
lá, eu posso
transparency, we have
indexicar, eu
data,
posso entender o que está
we can
acontecendo, eu
go
posso
look
fazer
into
denúncias,
that,
mas se a gente sequer tem acesso a
and
essas informações,
having
a
that,
sociedade civil e a academia fica de mãos
and
atadas,
civil
né?
society and
E
academia have their
esse
hands tied.
apagão, essa falta de informação, ela é
So
estratégica. Ela é
that lack
estratégica,
of
ela é intencional,
information is strategic, it's
ela
intentional,
impede que quem
it
pode
hinders
fazer alinhamento desses dados
the
e
people that could
mostrar para a
align that
sociedade, uma
data
sociedade
and
cidadão
show
comum, né,
society
fica
and
impossibilitado de
common
fazer isso.
citizens, they're
E
not
aí
able
eu
to do that.
trago para finalizar, né, que eu
So
já
to
peguei 10 minutos e eu
conclude,
não quero passar do tempo,
I don't want to
é
go over my
que a gente
time.
precisa incluir de fato
We
a
have
sustentabilidade como
to,
um
in
valor.
fact,
A gente não tem mais
include
tempo, né? Eu
sustainability
acho que
as a
nós já,
value. We
já
don't have
falou
more
sobre a camada
time,
de
any
ozônio,
more
ninguém mais
time.
fala
What he
sobre
said
isso, né?
about the
Parece que o
ozone
buraco
layer,
vai
nobody talks about that
crescer.
anymore. It feels like the hole's not
É
growing anymore. Is
assustador,
that it? So it's
acho que a
scary.
juventude,
It's
a
scary. I
gente fica
think
espremido nessa
that
situação, porque tanto
we
a
are stuck in the middle
tecnologia
in that
trouxe
situation because
caos,
the
eu diria, para a vida da juventude,
technology
porque a gente
brought
o tempo
about
todo
chaos
se renovando, e
into
ainda assim
youth
tem essa
lives. We
dificuldade, é um
have to renew
desafio, e não é só no
ourselves
Brasil,
all the
né? É um
time.
desafio
And
a
it's
nível
always a
global,
challenge.
e ao
It's not
mesmo
just
tempo a
in
gente está
Brazil, it's
pensando assim, a
global.
gente vai ter
And at the
filhos, a gente
same
vai ter
time,
família, vai
we
ter
think, well, we're going
próxima
to have
geração,
kids, we're going to have family, we're going to have a next
como é o carpe
generation.
diem, né? Porque já está
So
tudo
carpe
acabando,
diem,
mas ainda assim
everything's
é
ending
importante a gente
already.
pensar em movimentos como a COP30, em
So we
pensar
do
qual é o
have to
legado que a
think
gente quer deixar
about
como país,
movements
e
of
pensar se nós temos
COP30 and what
poder,
legacy we
né?
want to
A
leave
gente
as a
tem um poder
country because
gigante
we have the
de pensar
power, we have huge
a
power
gente tem,
when we think
não,
about
se a gente for pensar
that.
só em América Latina,
If we think
olha
of Latin
os
America
pequenos e médios
alone,
provedores de
look at
internet conseguiram
we
fazer com
the
que fizeram no nosso
small and
país. Então, assim, a
mid-sized
gente tem
providers
muita
were able to
capacidade
do in our
de
country. So we
pautar,
have a
de
lot of
barganhar.
capability
Então, me
of
assusta que, apesar dessa
bargaining
capacidade, a gente não tenha
and to
barganhado
win.
com os grandes
And
players
when
mundiais.
I
A
know we
gente
haven't been
tenha
bargaining with
se
the big
submetido.
global
E isso
players,
é algo
we've
que a gente precisa
been
levar em conta. Então,
submissive,
assim, a gente
and we
precisa
have to
pautar a
take that
sustentabilidade
into
como
account.
valor.
We
Algo que
have to
sempre me
consider
dizem quando a gente está falando de
sustainability as a
conectividade na
value.
Amazônia,
Something
é
they
você
always tell
sabe,
me
a
when
gente
we
tem que
talk
ter
about
cuidado porque a
connectivity in
floresta,
the
ela vai,
Amazon,
aí
you have to be
volta, né?
careful because
A
of the
maior parte da
forest, right?
população
And then it
da
goes
Amazônia
back
é
to that
urbana,
again.
ela não
Most of
está em
the
regiões remotas, ela
population
não está,
in the
mesmo os ribeirinhos não estão numa
in
situação completamente
Amazonia,
isolada
they
da
are not
sociedade. E
isolated
ainda
from
assim,
society. They live in
a gente
urban
não tem
areas.
informação suficiente de
And
onde
we
tem,
don't have
quais
enough
são as
information
áreas não
about
ligadas por fibra
the
óptica,
areas that are
etc.
not connected
Então, por exemplo, quando a gente
to
fala de infovias
fiber
como a melhor
optics.
solução, a gente
So when
leva
we
em
talk
conta
about
que as
info
infovias não vão
pathways as the best
capilarizar o
solution,
suficiente para que
there
cada
won't
comunidade
be
na região amazônica
capillary
tenha acesso à
enough
internet.
so that
Mas
all
aí,
the
quando a gente
areas in
fala
the
de
Amazon has the
sustentação
internet.
ambientais, a gente está ignorando a
But
quantidade de lixo
and
espacial que
then
a
we
gente tem criado,
also
como se a camada de
ignore
ozônio
the
não
amount of
existisse, né?
spatial trash
Então,
that we've
acho que
been
aí a principal,
been
mais uma vez,
creating.
a desigualdade regional,
So once
algo
again,
que eu acho interessante
regional
pontuar é que,
inequality.
apesar da gente ter
And it's important to mention
uma
that
região
although we
que a
have
gente está falando a gente ainda fala de hidrelétricas como uma
a
solução
region where
energética
we talk about
positivamente
hydropower
sustentável,
plants as
a gente
something
tem que
that's
pensar que
positively
isso não é
sustainable. We've
verdade.
known for a
E
while
ainda
now that
assim,
that's not true. But still, there's recent news that they finishing building in Tucuruí the
Roraima ao Sistema Nacional de Energia.
places to connect Roraima to the national
A gente
energy
explorou a
system.
região, a gente
We've explored the
afetou diversas
region.
comunidades para a gente
We've
trazer
affected many
energia
different
próxima
communities
do sul
to
e para o sudeste,
give
mas
them
Roraima está sendo
energy,
conectada ao Sistema Nacional de Energia só agora.
but they're only being connected right
Só
now
que a
to the
gente
national
precisa
system of
enxergar
energy.
que
So
como
that's something we
país nós
have to
ainda não
see as a
tratamos a
country.
população
We
amazônica
still
como
have
gente.
not
Eu acho que
been
esse é o
treating
resumo.
the
E
population
para
of
fazer cor ao
Amazonia
que
as
CA
people.
falou,
That's
né?
a summary.
Eu
And
fui sempre apaixonada por CA, mas fiquei muito feliz ele ter mencionado
I love
Marina.
CA, and I'm glad that he mentioned Marina.
De que assim,
I really
Marina
admire
Silva,
you.
né, algo que ela pontua,
Marina
assim, a gente
Silva, something that
precisa
she
sair
always
do não
says
podemos.
is that
A
we
gente
have to
não
get
pode
out
fazer
of
isso.
the we
Nós precisamos sair
can't.
do não podemos
We have to
enquanto
get out of that spot.
sociedade, enquanto atores,
As a
seja lá
society, as
empresarial, seja lá sociedade
players,
civil, a gente
be
precisa
it
sair
civil
do não
society,
podemos
business, be it the
para
business
como
society,
fazemos o que a gente precisa fazer, para a gente fazer
instead
o que precisa
to
ser
how do
feito.
we do it and what do we have to do? What has to be
Obrigada.
done? That's what we have to do.
Bom,
Thank you.
temos a felicidade de já estar aqui, já estar acompanhando
So,
o painel a vereadora Eliette Paraguaçu, que
we
eu vou
have
convidá-la que a subir à mesa. Vamos
other
finalizar em 5
woman,
minutos também com o nosso
Eliette,
embaixador
to
para
join
fazer
us here
sobre perspectivas de futuro, mas já quero convidá-la
about the
agradecendo
future
mais a sua presença,
perspectives
Eliette, é um
and
prazer.
thank her for her presence.
A palavra é sua, Everton.
Muito obrigado, Bianca.
Thank you,
Nessa segunda
Bianca.
parte, antes de
In the
começar, eu
second part,
gostaria de expressar algo
before I
que eu devia
begin,
ter
I'd
dito
like
na
to
minha
say
primeira
something that I should have
intervenção.
mentioned in the first part.
O apoio à moção de
So,
solidariedade que o
supporting the
Carlos
motion of
Afonso
solidarity
fez
that Carlos
à ministra
Alfonso
Marina
made
Silva,
to
que
Minister
não apenas
Marina
é uma
Silva,
autoridade
who not
do ponto de
only
vista
is
formal,
an
mas é uma
official
autoridade
based
no
on
assunto
the
meio ambiente e com uma ajuda
formal point of view, but
dedicada a isso.
also
Então, é
an
inaceitável que
authority
ocorra no parlamento
in the
brasileiro
environment.
tipo
So
de
it's unacceptable
achaque que houve
to have
com
that type of
uma
thing
mulher
in Parliament,
dessa
in
estirpe.
Brazilian Parliament, of such, with something like that to happen with such a knowledgeable and important woman.
Bom, dando continuidade à nossa discussão e olhando para o
Now,
futuro,
to continue our conversation and looking at the future, I would quickly like to address the opportunities and challenges that
agora em novembro.
will come up with the presence of COP30 in November. And this event has a global dimension, as everybody knows, and it highlights the need to apply some principles of governance that Brazil well knows in openness, representativity, and participation and equality. In that part of the debate, I mentioned more questions than answers. We'd be talking about the future. The idea is to launch a debate and not reach previously fabricated ideas. Almost 3 decades after Rio 92, we're getting ready to host another major event in November, and the official name is the 30th Conference of the Parties in the Convention of the United Nations about Climate Change. That convention, as was mentioned, is one of the main results of Rio 92. Hosting this summit in the heart of Amazonia is not just logistics. Actually, it's against logistics. A lot of work to create the framework to allow so many participants to be present in Belém is actually a huge logistics challenge. But before anything, it's an ethical, geopolitical, and symbolic affirmation. We have an undeniable star role in the climate agenda that has been shown since the realization of Rio 92. In terms of future scenarios, I could say that the challenges to expand the participation of different sectors of society in the climate change debates are notable. But the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance could offer us some important aspects. As in the internet, where the participation of many different parties are fundamental for the dimension in use, the climate agenda requires the actions of many different sectors. In COP30, Belém will be the stage for global crossroads. The world will look at us as not only the guardians of the biggest tropical forest in the country, on the planet, excuse me, but also a nation that's able to network sustainability, social justice, and technological innovation. So we have history. We've planned the climate change national plan in 2008 and for the climate change in 2009, and we submitted ambitious targets for a developing country to the Paris Agreement. But the challenges have intensified and time is not in our favor. Therefore, COP30 is our opportunity to take a step ahead, but it has to be done with all sectors of society. As the internet management back in the 90s, the climate fight cannot be limited to offices or conferences. We have to bring to the debate and to the participation the excitement of youth, the original people's knowledge, techniques of small farmers, the methods from scientists, participation and engagement of workers and business people, the excitement of artists, and the silent work of people in IT. With the diversity of voices and knowledge, will we have the ability of formulating long-lasting solutions for this biggest civilization challenge for our generations, the global climate change. And that's where we intersect with digital governance. The discussion and COP and global climate is crucial. Intelligence in the outskirts, which is typical of the internet, and the systems that produce changes that are not expected through diverse contributions, and is an asset to be explored to boost innovation and collaboration to find solutions for the climate phenomenon. Such as technologies, some technologies were mentioned. We also have to mention the possibility of counting on real-time sensors to monitor the forest, blockchain to track the traceability of production chains, AI to predict disasters and optimize the use of resources. That also requires that the governance of this technology is in line with the principles of sustainability, inclusion, and respect towards human rights. We cannot repeat in the digital area the exclusions that we already face in the physical world. The key question for us at the FIB is, how can we make COP30 reflect the spirit of a free, open, inclusive, and multi-stakeholder internet that we have built since 1992? How can we guarantee that technology is at the service of climate justice and not predatory profit? So to do that, we have to do what we do best: listen, dialogue, network, create bridges. Rio 92 has taught us that bold decisions can change the world, that innovative paths are possible, and COP30 will be our chance to show that Brazil, with our forest, with our mega diversity, and our calling for peace and dialogue and diplomacy, Brazil is ready to spearhead again with courage, with everyone, and for everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Everton. Now, to conclude the second part of the panel, I couldn't be happier to say that we have you with us over 20 years in environmental advocacy, and now she's our alderwoman in Salvador. I met Iliette in 2009 in a technology event, Gender and Race, with a very powerful speech. She showed that we can advance in diversity and technology, even especially in the racial side. So I know you've heard some of the debates already. Thank you. I know you have a very tight schedule. Over to you.
Uma boa tarde a todas as pessoas.
Hello, good afternoon. Let me first apologize for being late. We were in the Congress House and, you know, I got caught there.
O convite não foi
And
porque a gente não conseguiu
we unfortunately couldn't answer to the invitation. Once we answered 3 days later, there was a ready-made agenda to be discussed. So I'd like to apologize for not having thought in advance that I could be right in the beginning of the agenda. If I knew I would be here before, I'm so sorry. Let me congratulate the panel and all these wonderful days, especially being here in Salvador, Bahia. I am a quilombola and someone who strives and advocates for environmental racism, fishing, and in the past years, we are following this trajectory, especially in the water populations and the populations called quilombos. I come from this area where we are obliged to fight against environmental unfairness. Bahia is a state covered with a higher percentage of Black people, second one after Africa, and we live so much unfairness. I live in a territory which is 1 kilometer away from the largest city of Bahia state, and I had to use the internet to advocate for the political and social unfairness. And thanks to the internet, I may advocate for environmental aspects about regions where I have never been before and those that I have visited before. And why am I saying all of that? About the importance of this tool, a tool which may be present at the governance of those who are gatekeepers, I mean, of our country. Indigenous areas, fishing, rural areas, and quilombola areas. We are people that still need to be covered and reached by those territories where we are guardians of the Brazilian nature, and we do that with love. And we have to understand that nature lives without ourselves, but we cannot live without nature. And COP30 will be a room for defeat and announce those unfairness. And Brazil, a country where exploitation for nature is an income source of those who not even live in the country, and which really weakness our population that becomes even poorer. And I managed to overcome the barriers and to be the first person in the Congress from a Quilombo region. That's the first time where we see something like that taking place in our Brazilian history. This is a way to ensure the importance of the tool, the importance of this ability. And that's still quite new. I have been fighting for over 20 years. We have a greater number of Black people and 16,000 people from the Quilombos, the so-called Quilombolas, 11 communities. 6 of them are already certified and the others are going under certification to be part of Foundation Palmares. And I live less than 1 kilometer away from large complexes in the state of Bahia. Bahia has 54 islands and 13 municipalities. I come from one of those islands. I come from an island which was not even in the map of the city of Salvador due to social responsibility of those companies explored by petroleum. I come from a place of justice, fairness, and that's my fight. The governance should be on the hands of the civil society and those communities that, unfortunately, due to capital reasons, they are sacrificed. My island, Ilha de Maré, is an area of sacrifice because you have the whole GDP of the state. So we are talking about fairness, justice, and internet and the networks. They don't only talk about that. And we made use of networks which are at the service of our population and the media of our peers that make that essential to announce what those indigenous quilombola communities do among other populations in Brazil, where we see diversity. Therefore, this instrument should be available to the civil society and to those guardians. What really keeps me alive until I reached the Congress House was the audiovisuals, the importance to have documentaries announcing political violence, environmental violence, and violence about all territories, where we are able to announce that based on technologies which are in favor of populations, communities which don't even have energy. We are talking about Brazilian communities where energy is far away to get there. And we have finding unfairness that throughout the century 21st, they are still so much present. And environmental racism, that is a factor, and it modifies in face of each situation, but environmental racism
Mas o racismo ambiental tem causado
racism
grandes
is being responsible
doenças coletivas nos territórios.
to develop
E essa está sendo uma
collective
ferramenta
diseases
de dizimação
in
do nosso
our
povo,
territories, and
de
we are
destruição em massa das nossas
destroying massively our
E a COP precisa falar.
communities, and COP
A COP
has
precisa falar
to
das
bring
injustiças que as
that
comunidades
discussion to the table.
que guarda os territórios,
Communities
cuida,
that
está
look
sendo
after their
assassinado.
territories, and they
O
have been
Brasil
murdered.
é desses países
Brazil is one of those countries
em segundo lugar do ranking
that
que mais
comes
mata
in
líderes
second place in the rank that kills
E
environmentalists
essas
the
pessoas elas
most.
estão sendo
And all these people, they are being granted, they are in the list of those that will be murdered as well if they don't step backwards in the defense of the environment. So they have to be at the service of those guardians to get to the communities and to indeed guarantee the sovereignty, to guarantee that those populations will be able to keep those territories with dignity, with calmness. Otherwise, if we don't understand what we have in our country, we won't be able to reach such a level of governance. So more and more, we have to think about technology.
Que garanta que o meio ambiente ele consiga equilibrar. Então, reconhecer a natureza como sujeita de
We have to
direito.
acknowledge the nature as the main player. This is one of the bills that we have.
Desculpa.
I'm so
Isso
sorry.
é dos projetos de lei
This is
do
one
mandato
of
popular das
the
águas.
bills of the popular mandates of the waters to acknowledge the nature as our rights, to acknowledge an environment as a place of life and not as a place of exploring, just on the name of capital. I believe that internet governance will just make some sense once it will be on the hands of our Brazilian guardians. Bless us, bless the waters and our Brazilian and the future of our country. God bless you.
Muito obrigada, Eliette.
Thank you so much, Eliette. Now we have some time for questions.
Teremos 4 perguntas.
4 questions, okay?
1 minuto por pergunta.
1 minute each question.
Ixi. Vamos fazer um bloco de 4 perguntas de até 1 minuto cada. E 5 perguntas? Ai, meu Deus, gente.
5 questions, okay.
4 perguntas.
4 questions and
conclusões finais dos nossos palestrantes.
the answers will be given by our guests' final conclusions, okay?
Temos problema técnico aqui? Vou passar meu microfone ali para o Will.
Bora que eu vou rápido para não gastar o tempo. Gente, parabéns pela fala de vocês.
Congratulations for your talks. I research on technology. I come from the northern region of the country. My question is a summary of the last Net Mundial, where I had begged for a debate about environment in the beginning of the letter, and nothing has been addressed on sustainability. And my question now is to Josimar and Teresinha. How can we build up effective diversity mechanism in the multi-stakeholder approach that will include those less privileged groups, such as installation of data centers, which also are considering the COP30, that are not taking into account the experience of those that live in the region. Let's emphasize here the notebook launched yesterday with CEPAP and IRIS and this perspective as how the forests of our defenders.
Boa tarde a todos e todas. Eu sou
Hello, good
Alexandre.
afternoon. My name is Alexander from the Roofless Movement. Workforce, roofless workforce. We are not able to see the results of the things, and I've seen an advocacy for multi-stakeholder, which relates the so-called advancements in the environmental agenda based on that model. Differently, we come from a process where the territory should be present. That's why after listening to Eliette, who knows, we may really, understand how things work at the territories, not a multi-stakeholder that will advocate for environment, but their territories and their people. As to Eco92, there was an increase in the emissions of greenhouse effects, deforestation, and social environmental inequalities. And what works really well about Eco92 is the carbon credit, which works fine so far. How come that today we have to trust that with the increase of data centers and with all the energy use, such as riverbeds and natural richness, why should we think that things are different?
Uma nota técnica popular para todos da mesa.
And this is a popular technical note that I'd like to give to the panelists so we can keep on this debate.
Tá funcionando? Tá. Boa tarde, eu sou Pietra, sou geógrafa e faço parte do
Hello, I
programa.
am a geography.
Uma mesa que trata pouco do
A panel
legado da Eco92.
That talks about Eco92 legacy, where developed countries, they are liable to the environment, and not only they should motivate developing countries to go after sustainable development. How do we see such an irony in Brazil, where we will be welcoming COP30, but we are responsible for a devastation, which is an indicator of environmental impact on a year of COP30, instead of advancing on a debate and talking about data center environmental impact, we are promoting exactly the opposite, approving in the Federal Senate a PL which talks that large entrepreneurs, large business, they may assess their own environmental impact. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What's your name? Pietra. My name is Pietra. Thank you, Pietra.
Boa tarde, Joara Marquezine, eu sou do Instituto no PEF e eu sou
I am
representante
PEF Institute and I am a representative. I'm sorry, I couldn't get what she said, which agency she's representing here today. You are all invited to know our agreement. I did not hear anyone talking about this agreement, which I didn't get the name, I'm sorry. This is the first international agreement to get specific measures to advocate for environmental measures, participation and justice access. I'm going to talk to, well, this has to do with Eco92 and Rio Plus 20 that is stopped in the Congress, the same Congress after that horror show that we saw yesterday with the Minister Marina. I would like to see the possibility, how can we discuss multilateralism and how can that be supported and addressed during COP30, as there is a perspective of digital breach in this agreement. Agreement ASCASUS, I think that's the name.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you.
Tempo,
as we are running late, could our panelists answer to the questions and then, you know, go for your final remarks? CA, please, could you start?
Eu entendi que ela se referiu ao acordo de Escazú, não é isso?
Ah, the agreement of Escazú, that's the name, Escazú.
Texto que diz o seguinte: dos próximos
One
desafios
of the next challenges that will make the internet way, the environment and the civil society to cross over again is the ratification by Brazil of the regional agreement about information access, public participation, and access to justice in environmental topics in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. To sum up, this is the Escazú agreement. Such a treaty addresses the right to information, environment, public participation in the environmental decision-making process, environmental fairness, and a health and sustainable environment. So far, 24 people have signed that agreement, Latin American and Caribbean countries. That is the first global agreement to talk about the rights of those who advocate for environment. That's it. That is a summary of the agreement. Daniele, thank you for your questions. I'll try to
da importância da presença do setor privado dentro desses
answer
ambientes de
addressing the importance of the private sector in this multi-sectorial sectorial involvement.
Para o nosso diplomata tratar a respeito de outras possibilidades metodológicas. Mas atualmente o melhor que a gente tem e vem se implementando é o multissetorialismo.
The best we have
E o
is a multi-sectorial and multilateralism. As Dilmar said, we are trying to create more space by the private sector and within the civil society to engage more room for addressing topics like that. We are facing a number of crises, and climate change is not one, but is a humanitarian crisis.
E aí muito nosso papel como Pacto Global e o meu papel
role as global
impact
and global management, my role is to advocate for this problem.
É grande parte do problema. Ela precisa ter ações concretas de redução das
requires
emissões,
concrete actions to reduce the emissions, to have a net zero format, and also to treat this large debate which have to do with the data centers. How will that be installed?
Só grande adendo para já encerrar. Como também engenheira, eu fui grande participante de licenciamento de grandes indústrias.
A participant of large industries, which has never impaired our installation process on the country. It added more robustness to that company anytime that an appropriated license is done with the environmental impact agreement and reports. So as citizens, how can we understand that this new legislation will be prohibited? Thank you, Daniel. And to conclude, I'd like to say that I'm very happy when I see the participation like the one we saw yesterday, because that enriches our debate, it qualifies it, and I get even happier to see that if there is a master line present at all comments, this is the line of concern with social inclusion, which means that we have to listen more and more and take into account these concerns which are of legitimacy in our society. And thank you for the invitation and to be part of this panel.
Obrigada. Terezinha.
Bem, acho que para finalizar, agradecer e dizer que foi uma honra
participar. To close, I'd like to
dessa
thank you. It was an honor to share this panel with all of you guys.
Acredito que aqui fica, a gente precisa
But I believe that this is a serious commitment with a significant and sustainable connectivity. But as to multi-stakeholder, it's important to say the following. I wish we could be discussing about a fewer chairs to the CGI, but to the civil society. But we are discussing here how to revoke some of the norms. I believe that we have to include people who are suffering or being affected, but how to guarantee that effective participation, I don't know, but it starts from a desire to include those people.
Bom, Terezinha me deu desafio maior aqui. Se o Everton estivesse aqui agora, ia dizer,
if Everton were here, I would let him say, speaking now and not me. But before anything else, I'd like to thank all the Carlos, Daniele,
o embaixador Everton, a Terezinha e a Bianca por essa moderação e
Ambassador Everton, our moderator, and our dear Congress lady, Congresswoman. It's the first time that I am participating on a panel with her as a deputy. She's a deputy now.
colocar
There are
alguns outros. Vocês me
topics.
fizeram perguntas e eu vou devolver com alguns outros, porque
You have asked
a
me some
gente
questions and I'm gonna
tem
answer you
temas
back
que eu
with
não
more
gosto
questions.
quando tem uma pontinha de colonialismo de quem
I
a
don't
gente
like
quer defender.
topics which are close to
Eu
a way to
prefiro
advocate for
alguns temas que eu acho
colonialisms.
que
I
esse é um
prefer other
país que
topics.
assinou mais
This is a
documentos
country which
internacionais
has
e que mais
signed
viola
a
direitos.
great number of international
A gente não
documents,
tem
but we are
falta
a country
de
that
documentos
violates the
internacionais para
most
proteger
documents.
ativistas no
We are not
Brasil.
lacking
A
of
gente tem
documents to
falta de
protect
implementação.
activists. What we are
Eu
lacking
vou
of
citar um
is
aqui que
lacking of
chama-se
implementation.
Convenção 69
There
da
is
OIT, que foi, sabe, uma
IoT,
construção histórica que daqui a pouco faz 50 anos.
historical construction, which is about to
Ela,
celebrate
né, foi
50
reconhecida
years.
pelo Congresso
It was
brasileiro.
acknowledged by the
Ela
Brazilian
tem decretos,
Congress.
ela tem legislação. E parte dessas discussões
It
que a gente
has
está
its
tendo aqui,
decrees and
se ela fosse
legislations, and
aplicada nos
part of
últimos
the
20
discussion,
anos,
if that would be
terras
applied
indígenas,
for
comunidades
20 years,
tradicionais
indigenous
pesqueiras todas
lands,
elas, a gente estaria discutindo outra
fishermen's
situação. Porque a
communities,
gente não tem
we would
falta
be here
de
discussing a different
legislação
situation because we are not
internacional ou
lacking of
regulamento
international
para proteger
legislation,
ativistas de
neither
direitos humanos.
regulations
O
to
Acordo de
protect
Casu
human
não é
rights
o
or
único que vai
activists.
fazer isso.
The
A
CASUS
Convenção
agreement
69
is
já
not the
faz
only
isso.
one. The Convention
Esse é o
69
dever da
already
Constituição 69
does
se ela
it.
estivesse sendo implementada. Porque às vezes a gente dá um saltozinho assim e
Sometimes
começa a anular o que
we
conquistou.
improve a little bit and we forget
E
about
começa a
what we have
apagar uma
achieved
conquista
before.
que está
And we
reconhecida no Estado
erase
brasileiro.
an achievement
A
which
gente
is being
precisa colocar a
acknowledged
Convenção 69
by the
como parte de
Brazilian
uma
state.
discussão
The
de
Convention
governança da
69
internet no
should
Brasil.
be part of internet governance discussion in
Porque
this
aí o
country.
data center não é só o data center.
It's not
É
only
tudo
data
que a gente
centers,
precisa para
but
fazer
everything else that
eletricidade
we
para a
need to
internet
have
funcionar.
electricity for internet to
Então,
operate.
eu estou revertendo aqui para as perguntas que vieram, e aí já concluindo, né? Agradecer, porque é o que a Petra nos traz sobre
What
desmonte de
Petra
legislação
talks
ambiental. Isso
about
debate que a gente
environmental
ficou para o final
legislation.
da mesa,
This
né?
is a debate
Daria
that
isso aqui de novo.
we led to the end
O
of the
Alexandre sobre o
table.
mercado de carbono,
And Alexander
eu só estou
about
pincelando para não
market.
deixar de falar, que eu acho que esse é um debate que a gente,
And
no
this is a
próximo fórum,
discussion
vocês precisam colocar no
which
centro desse
you have
debate
to
como é que a
include in the
internet faz
next
parte
forum
desse
as
processo.
the core of the debate.
Mercado de carbono.
Carbon market.
Esse é um outro tema. E já finalizando, e aí
This is another topic. Multi-stakeholder.
Né? Oh, meu Deus, só aí a palavra, é porque entrou os dois multi aqui agora. Como é que a gente, né, responde a isso? Acho que é construindo espaços como esse. Acho que o fórum,
By having opportunities like this forum is what we have to keep on discussing multi-stakeholder. And this is the place to be. If before there was not a debate about environment in our forum, now that's even more advanced, which is climate, environment and climate issues.
E a gente está tendo essa oportunidade aqui, então agradeço pelo convite e por essa construção aqui. Obrigado.
Thank you again.
E para finalizar, Eliette
And
também.
to close and conclude, you have 1 minute, Eliette.
Então, gente, essa que é a minha responder a pergunta dos três companheiros.
Answering to the 3 questions.
E o primeiro companheiro sobre o lançamento. Eu quero um historial lá para o gabinete. Mas dizer que o Brasil ele é signatário da Convenção 69.
Is signature of the convention.
E aí, essa lei ela é violada todos os dias em nome do
This
capital.
law is violated every single day on the name of capital. Remember the petroleum crime in Brazil? Remember Brumadinhos?
Essas pessoas que cometeram todo esse crime,
all the murders, the people that were responsible for those crimes, they were not punished. And the life of those who died, could not be saved. To Brazil doesn't matter, and this is the place where it doesn't matter, that does not respect the convention, does not respect the environmental law, does not respect whatever these people is been building up throughout the past years. Indigenous would talk about climate crisis for many, many years, and now that is being stolen by those who had never suffered environmental racism, and those of us that face all the denial by our population is not involved. And here I'm talking about Black, indigenous communities, this country, which is a racist country and does not consider or include populations like mine. Before we are talking about climate crisis, now we are talking about emergency. In a few years, what are we going to talk about if people continue denying and the nature is giving signs and signs for very long, and people still believe that environmentalists are the ones still to solve the problem. But you fool yourself, because this is a task that should be in everyone's minds. The lands, the waters, the air is calling strongly, and the society is not paying attention. We have to rethink our way of living and the way as nature is explored. So this responsibility of looking after the environment and to think about this governance of internet is to consider these players guardians and nature. Well, once again, let's keep advocating for the environment and for everything. It's not just in our words, but also in our attitudes, where all these people will help us to foster laws and to have a smoke curtain. The beach APEC, the devastation APEC, it has been approved lately. And Brazil is talking about the silicon baby. Come on, wake up. Let's pay attention. There is a smoke curtain blinding us, and we have to understand what is the trauma that is there to destroy even more our environment.
Com essa fala, nós finalizamos o nosso painel.
With that, our panel is closed. Thank you so much for your presence, attention, our dear panelists, our participants, and, let's keep talking. See you later.